Hey there, Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. And I'm back from basically a week of bedridden illness, and I really am in need of something fun here. That is why I'm headed back to the Fat Electrician, and I've still got a big backlog of his videos that I have not seen yet. And this one caught my eye, and it sounds entertaining, and it's called America Stole a German Submarine and Stuck It in Chicago. All right, if you're new to my channel, what I do is, since I'm a high school history teacher, know a little bit about history, I love to be able to jump in at times, talk about the history behind some of these things, how it may affect me as a teacher, and how it's kind of seen in the classroom. Now, the original video is going to be down below. Make sure you're supporting his channel. Make sure to sub. He's a big supporter of what we do over here. With that, let's get started. All right, let's do it.
You know what you call the only Type 9C German U-boat left in existence? America's. Today we're talking about the time that America stole an entire German submarine and then stuck it in the middle of Chicago. I mean, when America strategically transferred a piece of equipment to an alternate location.
Steal.
But first,
oh, just like that shirt.
This video is brought to you by Warwood Tools, a family-owned business.
Sorry, I will
that
be
for over
coughing.
160
Video.
years has
Probably
been making
sneezing.
sledgehammers and axes right out of West Virginia using.
I just wanted to get. I wanted to get out of bed.
To this day, they still make all their tools.
Get in front of the computer. Have some fun.
So
interact with you all again.
Outlast you, I would recommend Warwood.
Give some love to my man Nick.
In the description down below. Moving on. Okay, important context in case you don't know. During World War II, American supply lines to the European theater were absolutely devastated by German U-boats, aka submarines.
You know, that was the thing that, you know, and going back to World War I, the Germans had such a leg up on was submarine warfare, and made sense because, you know, they going into really the creation of the modern Germany, big thing they to compete with was the Navy, right? They knew, go back to like Bismarck's days and stuff, of like the Germany needed to be a naval power. And who do you compete with that? Of course, the British. Now, the British have been the biggest naval power in history. So the way the Germans innovated was undersea boats. That's how they got their leg up and how they could compete and were on that cutting edge of technology. So the Germans know what they're doing with them U-boats.
These German U-boats are credited with sinking over 2,700 American ships, totaling in over 14 million tons of American ships and supplies that were put at the bottom of the ocean. Because of this, America would form what is known as hunter-killer groups.
Bob's got the squeaky toy.
Ships who were sent out, and their entire job was to hunt and destroy these enemy submarines. Because that's just how America gets down. We don't believe in self-defense. We believe in self-offense. It's way more efficient. And that's
the best offense is the best defense is the best offense. Credit. You know what I meant.
It's pretty much all the context you need. So, April 4th, 1944, a hunter-killer group known as Task Force 22.3 would set out, engage, and destroy the German U-boat 515. Absolutely
Search and
everything
destroy
went according to
missions,
plan.
right?
Nothing was out of the ordinary. They hit it with depth charges, critically wounding the submarine, forcing it to surface one last time to allow the crew to escape before the submarine would sink below the ocean waves forever. But you
know, the German disgruntling, being disgruntled with the Americans was, you know, and it happened with both world wars, was the U.S. trading with Germany's enemies, you know, across the Atlantic. And they always saw that as basically a provocation of war, never saw that as neutrality. In the American perspective, it's like, yeah, you can be neutral, you're not fighting. Yeah, you're dealing, you know, pretty much exclusively with one side. And when it comes to, you know, dealing with armaments, you know, that was Germany's big thing was, you know, no, the United States are not neutral, right? And these are acts of aggression by, you know, trying to conduct this trade.
It was on this particular day that the American commander, Daniel Gallery, would take unique notice of the fact that the German submarines always surfaced to allow their crew to escape. And he decided that he was going to do something unprecedented, something that no American sailor had done since 1815. Yoink. He was going to send out a boarding party and steal that enemy submarine.
Just think about like just like stealing a submarine. It's not like stealing a regular ship, right? It's not a pirate ship. You put your plank down and go and take it. It's not a trireme. You go and poke it with your battering ram and then board it. It's a submarine, a thing that can submerge, right? Although it takes a lot to do that. You know what I mean?
He immediately puts a plan into action, assembling two separate boarding parties, each to be comprised
of one
just
officer
and 8 enlisted men. And these 8 enlisted men are going to be the top 8 guys that you would absolutely want on hand to be able to address any problem that could arise with keeping this submarine from sinking to the ocean floor. People like the electrician, the machinist, the boatswain's mate, the torpedo technician, oh, and the photographer. Yeah, one of the 8 people going on the extremely dangerous and important mission is going to be a photographer because, you know, Pixar, it didn't happen, right? America's about to do some gangster shit. You best believe we're going to designate somebody to stand in the corner with the camera and yell "World Star" while we do it. June 1st, 1944, Task Force 22.3 receives intel that there's an enemy submarine operating off the coast of Africa. That submarine would turn out to be U-boat 505, and they would head to it immediately. And this poor U-boat has absolutely no idea what's coming for it, because at this point in time, this task force is comprised of the flagship and escort carrier, the USS Guadalcanal, as well as 5 destroyer escorts, the USS Pope, the Pillsbury, the Jinx, the Chatelaine, and the Flaherty. And if you don't know what a destroyer escort is, at this point in time, it is a ship that has one job and one job only, and that is to fuck up enemy submarines. Okay, this hunter-killer group is rolling up on this U-boat like Debo on a beach cruiser. Somebody's about to have a bad day, and it's probably not going to be them.
Friday.
Oh, shit.
June 4th, 1944, after 3 days of chasing down this U-boat, they would finally catch up to it, and the USS Guadalcanal would immediately scramble 2 Grumman F-4F Wildcat fighters as the rest of the destroyer escorts made their way towards the submarine. U-boat 505 was already submerged and underwater, but the Grumman F-4F Wildcat pilots are able to see the long dark shadow of the submarine underneath the water because it's broad daylight. And once they confirm that it is in fact an enemy submarine...
That'd be the big question I'm sure you're asking. Everybody's like, how do you track submarines like that? You know, I mean, other than sonar, that kind of technology, but you know, you obviously can't take a submarine unless it's emerged.
The destroyer escorts begin loading their hedgehogs to fire upon it. If you don't know what a hedgehog is, it is the most feared anti-submarine weapon in all of World War II. It is like a fully automatic mortar capable of firing over a wide area. Once these mortars hit the water, they can plunge into the depths of the ocean at 33 feet per second. And as soon as they make impact with anything, they will explode and destroy it. The hedgehogs would detonate early, not scoring a direct hit, but still rocking and damaging the submarine, jamming its propeller, and putting out its lights. Quickly realizing they hadn't done enough damage, the destroyer escorts above would begin launching depth charges. The depth charges would rupture the hull of U-boat 505, and the entire submarine would be forced to surface one last time as a hatch would open and all the German sailors would begin flooding out onto its deck and into life rafts. At this point, the American boarding party grabbed their Tommy guns, hopped in their whaling boat.
What year is this, by the way? I didn't.
The submarine. They received no resistance from the Germans as they made their way down the hatch into the sub and began working on it to try to save it. Okay, time out. I need to make sure that you fully grasp how ridiculous what these 9 Americans are about to do. That the 50 men that have been living on this U-boat, that have been trained on this U-boat has controls in their language and in their units of measurement.
What chance do the Americans have to
that,
resurrect
this thing is so damaged that we need to run for our lives. And then while they were evacuating, they would also place scuttling charges, which are large explosive devices that detonate, ensuring that the ship sinks so that America
destroy the evidence.
So not only is the situation...
One question to ask is like, why would the Americans be so interested in this kind of thing? I mean, is like reverse engineer their technology, like it was an alien spacecraft, or just for the lulz? You know what I mean?
Situation so bad that 50 of them can't fix it, but they made the situation worse on their way out. And you now have 9 Americans, one of which is a fucking camera guy, going in there to do what they couldn't pull off. This mission is seriously impossible and borderline insane, but they do it anyways because America. So they get inside the sub and begin going to work immediately. The torpedo technicians and ordnance officers begin
tow this thing out?
Scuttling charges as the electricians go to work at trying to get the bilge pumps back up and running to pump water out of the submarine. And the damage control men and the machinists begin working on plugging holes and getting the motor back up and running. And while all of this is going on, the officer in charge of the American boarding party, Lieutenant Albert David, notices that the submarine is sinking so fast that there is now water pouring into the open hatch on top. And it is at this moment that he has to make a split decision. He either has to get his men out and save their lives, or he has to shut the hatch and give them more time to work. But if they can't pull it off, they are all going to die in that submarine. And without thinking twice, he closes the hatch. A few minutes later, the second boarding party would board U-boat 505, and they would attempt to open the hatch to get inside the submarine and help. But the sinking submarine had created such a powerful vacuum that it was impossible. So they did the next best thing. They got a tow line, tied the U-boat 505 to the USS Guadalcanal, as the USS Guadalcanal began towing the now sinking U-boat. Feeling that they were now moving, the Americans on the inside had an ingenious idea. You see, the U-boat didn't have enough power for anything but lights. They were running entirely on batteries. The reason they didn't have power is because the propeller was jammed and the propeller was jammed because they couldn't get the motor going again. So what they did was they disconnected the drive shaft between the motor and the propeller, allowing the propeller to free spin in the current of the USS Guadalcanal as it's being towed. This would turn the alternator, generating power and giving the U-boat enough power to activate its bilge pumps and begin pumping water out of it. I cannot stress to you enough how fucking genius this was to do. This saved all of their lives for sure. And to be able to have the knowledge and wisdom to come up with a solution like that while you're actively fucking dying in a tin can under the ocean is incredible.
I could never, I couldn't, I'm not super claustrophobic. I don't think probably any more than like a regular person, but the submarines and like being in a submarine or like something like that is like the last place I would want to be if I had to be in the military. I hate being something that you feel like you have no control of. You know what I mean? And there's not like a plan B.
So things are already looking up, but at a minimum, they have to get that hatch back open so that the first boarding crew can escape if they absolutely need to. So the second boarding crew with their Tommy guns proceeds to pluck one of the Germans out of their life raft and persuade him to activate the pressure valve, which is going to equalize the pressure inside and outside the sub, allowing them to open the hatch door. That happens, and the second boarding crew gets inside and also gets to work. And all this is going on, and there's 50 Germans sitting out there in life rafts like, fuck. Like, what do you do in that situation? You have just been outclassed on every conceivable level. Like, you were in combat, they damaged your ship to the point that you couldn't fix it.
Feel lucky to be alive.
Then you tried to rage quit and blow up your own ship, and then they're like, no, I've changed my mind. And then they went in there and made it so you couldn't even sink your own ship. At this point, the rest of the task force goes around plucking all the Germans out of their life rafts because they're now prisoners of war, as Commander Gallery comes to the conclusion, fuck it, we're just gonna have to tow this sinking submarine while it's actively sinking all the way to the nearest American port, and we're just gonna have sailors in there working 24/7 around the clock to try to keep it above the waterline. Not a terrible plan, but the only problem is they're like 150 miles off the coast of Africa, and the nearest American port is 2,500 miles away, and if that wasn't bad enough, it's in fucking Bermuda, you know, where the whole triangle thing is. I mean, the disrespect with this is absolutely palpable. Could you imagine being one of these Germans sitting there like, not only are you not allowed to sink your own ship, you're not even allowed to rage quit. The Americans come in, steal your shit, and now they're gonna joyride it through the Bermuda Triangle and not even lose it just to flex on you like that? It's ridiculous. So they get everything buttoned up and they get underway, headed out.
Where are my Bermuda Triangle people at? I don't get it. It's just fairy tales, right? Okay, maybe there's some storms and stuff. You know how big the Bermuda Triangle is? You know how far away Bermuda is? If you look at a map, it looks like it's about a third of the way between the US and like Europe. It is far.
At which point, a couple days later, the commander of the German submarine wakes up in the infirmary on the USS Guadalcanal. Apparently, he had been hit in the head and lost consciousness for a number of days. At which point, Commander Gallery comes down to have a conversation with him, and he's like, hey, here's the deal. We stole your sub. We're towing it to the Bermuda Triangle for a joyride. It's gonna be great. The German commander absolutely refuses to believe him. He's like, that's not possible. I had 50 dudes. They weren't able to save that sub. We scuttled it on the way out for insurance. There's no way that you managed to keep that sub from sinking. At which point, Commander Gallery is like, oh, well, here's all the shit from your office that's distinctly not waterlogged. Also, if you look out the window,
there it is.
We're towing your submarine behind us right now. At which point, the German officer completely loses his shit. He starts crying. He's completely inconsolable. He's like, when my chain of command finds out that this happened, they're going to torture me and then they're going to kill me. Or the other way around. I don't know. This is absolutely terrible. But Commander Gallery, being
not going to be down with that.
He's like, hey, buddy, pal, friend, you're going to sit in a nice POW camp for the duration of the war. We're gonna win, and by the time you get to go back home, you're not gonna have a chain of command, and all of your leadership infrastructure is gonna be completely dismantled. I wouldn't worry about it. Didn't really make
exactly what happens. I mean, if you weren't, if you didn't end yourself, if you were a Nazi command, or didn't die in the fighting, you got put up in the Nuremberg trial. So you don't really have a lot of people to have to really go to. So basically, dude, you're in a good place right now, actually.
Make him feel better, but I thought it was funny. Now, so they're still making their way towards that big triangle thing, but pulling this submarine and keeping it from taking on water is a constant struggle. And it's starting to look like they're not going to be able to keep enough water out of this submarine long enough to get it all the way to
2,500 miles.
So they start interviewing Germans.
It'd be like towing it across the United States.
one with technical knowledge that would be willing to help them keep it afloat.
You're not going to be able to go very
they come
fast
across a
pulling
young German sailor by the name of Felix Ewald, and he would inform them that not only is he not German, he's definitely not a Nazi, and he's certainly not a fan. He was conscripted when the Nazis invaded Poland, and he was basically being forced to be there, and that if America wanted help, he was happy to do so. So he would immediately go to work helping the Americans keep the submarine afloat the entire time as they traveled back to Bermuda. As the remaining German POWs began asking questions, what happened to Felix? What happened to Ewald? Where is Ewald? And they began looking for him every chance they got, searching everywhere they could find him. The Americans had told him that they killed him, but they didn't believe it because they knew he was Polish too. So they just kept looking and looking, scanning everywhere. And this would be the inspiration for the childhood book, Where's Waldo? I'm just kidding. I made that part up. Anyways, with the help of Felix, they managed to tow this submarine all the way to Bermuda. They get it fixed up. It's definitely not going to sink, at which point they get to go in and really start looking at what intel they had managed to gather. And holy shit, there is an up-to-date active Enigma cipher machine.
Oh, dang.
This is what the Germans were using to send all their secret military communications, and it could prove absolutely invaluable.
Okay, that's huge. Okay, so decoding messages was such an intensive process in World War II. Back in those days, you know, it was very easy to intercept messages. It was not very hard. Radio, telegraph, phones, all that stuff. However, everything was decoded. Everything was coded in a way that was insanely difficult. Okay. Look into the stories. Look at watch what's the movie Imitation Game, right, with Cumberbatch. You're basically using like computer technology and encryption technology before modern computers. And that was the big thing, is you had to be able to crack it, you needed one of those machines and then have to like reverse engineer it. And even when they had that, if you watch Imitation Game, you'll see how long it took and how incredible of an endeavor it was and the geniuses that had to be behind to make that even work. So that's huge. I could see now why they really wanted to keep this thing. And it wasn't just for the lulz information.
Had a bunch of up-to-date ciphers and a bunch of other documents that were deemed so important that they were printed on water-soluble paper so that if the boat did sink and these documents got wet, they would completely disintegrate and be unrecoverable. It is at this point that the American leadership decides the Germans have to think that this boat went down and everyone died. We cannot let them know that we have this information because now we're going to be able to decode all of their secret transmissions and we don't want them to change the code. So they take U-Boat 505, they actually paint it to look like an American submarine and then start referring to it as the USS Nemo, which if you don't know is Latin for no one. They then take all the German POWs from U-Boat 505, send them to Louisiana, where they are going to be completely segregated from all the other POWs, so nobody knows who they are or where they came from. All the American sailors are then ordered to turn over all of the souvenirs that they gathered out of U-Boat 505 and to shut the fuck up about it. And as far as anyone on the planet needs to be concerned, this U-boat is at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, 150 miles off the coast of Africa. Nobody can know that we have this. But if those Germans weren't allowed to write home through the Red Cross, that's technically a Geneva Convention violation. But first of all, when you're on the winning side, those aren't actually rules, they're more like suggestions.
The code is more what you'd call guidelines than actual rules.
Secondly, let's just be honest here. If you were a POW in World War II and the worst thing that happened to you is you weren't allowed to write home while you were being well fed and treated with dignity, you came out on top. All right, so somehow the United States manages to keep this thing a complete secret until May 7th, 1945, when Germany issues their unconditional surrender. And it is at this point that the smack talking can now commence. Because now we are going to take this submarine, you know, the only remaining Type 9C German sub left on the planet, even though they manufactured hundreds, we sunk all of them, except for this one. Now we're going to drive that bitch to Philadelphia and use it to raise funds, and anybody that buys a bunch of war bonds can get a guided tour of this German sub, because a lot of people quit buying war bonds after Germany surrendered because they thought the war was coming to an end and we were still fighting the war in the Pacific against the Japanese. So this was like a huge fundraising opportunity, and that's exactly what they did. They sold.
So, war bonds. Okay, one of the biggest stresses on any country at war. Remember, this is total war. This is where a country's entire priority is the war effort, the economy, labor, resources, everything is geared towards a war, right? And financing is huge, right? The countries that run out of money are the ones that are going to be out first. And war bonds, essentially what you're doing is like kind of like giving a loan to your government almost. And people saw them as like patriotic things and like a good investment. You know what I mean? It's patriotic to help your country this way. And then, you know, and yeah, like win-win situation, right? So, but you could see as the war is going on, people not feeling like that would be smart anymore. So, you know, great way to raise money. Yeah.
As soon as that started slowing down,
But the Americans did this. Well, a lot of countries did it, but it was a huge part of the American financing effort was from civilians. The government loaned money from the people.
Other major U.S. city. They towed it up to New York. Then New York bought a bunch of war bonds. And then World War II would finally come to an end. When
would you pay? Would you have done it?
Additional surrender. And now we've got this German submarine, and we don't know what to do with it. So the U.S. government does what the U.S. government do, and they're like, hear me out. What if we shot nuclear bombs at it for science?
Oh my God.
At which point, Commander Gallery, who's now an admiral, chimes in
on.
and is like, no, I stole that thing fair and
we're not
square.
blowing it up.
We're keeping it. So he ends up orchestrating a deal with the city of Chicago where the U.S. government will donate the submarine to the city of Chicago as long as the city pays to have it shipped all the way there. And that's exactly what happens. They took a Type 9C German submarine, the whole thing, in one piece, and put it in Chicago.
Did they make it look German again?
The major city that's the most inland of
yeah.
any
I was wondering in this whole thing, did they like go through like the Erie Canal and then like go through the Great Lakes and like, you know, pull? It would have been cool if they could actually like make it work and you have this German submarine going through the Erie Canal and stuff like that, then make its way through the Great Lakes onto Chicago, which is on, you know, Lake Michigan. That would have been the coolest. I was really hoping that could have happened.
America. It's literally fucking 2 Germanys into America. Yes, that is to scale. An incredible logistical feat is the icing on the cake for one of the most amazing and utterly disrespectful stories to ever come out of World War II. And I'm happy to say that if you would ever like to go see U-Boat 505, you still can, because it is still in Chicago today at the Museum of Science and Industry, where it currently sits as a proud member of the second largest navy on the planet, America's fleet of museum ships. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang out.
On June 9th.
Let's go. Final thoughts. All right. I needed a story like that to get my mood back up from being bedridden a whole week. And Fat Electrician does, you know, some of the best storytelling we have on YouTube. So I didn't know about this. Them, you know, heisting and this U-boat. It's such an incredible endeavor to see that something like that could even be possible. And then, you know, historically, I love these stories, but I also love like impact and like what, like the so what thing. Okay, that was cool, but like so what? And you could see, you know, I would be interested to know what impacted. They said they got one of the decryption machines for the Enigma, and what of any use did that end up having? How did that line up with what they were doing up in England in Brexley Park? Is that what they call that there? So if it had any effect that way of helping to actually break the code, but nevertheless being able to have something like that to be able to research would have been massive. But anyways, great story there. I'm so glad I could check this out. And with that, you guys, thanks for hanging out with me. Again, I hope to be back to hopefully a regular upload schedule here once again, as I'm starting to hopefully feel better. And with that, we'll see y'all later.